Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the March edition of Molten Music Monthly. Now, have I redone the ident? Have I? Because at this point I haven't. Filming this, I haven't done it. I just haven't found the time. So have I done it? Is this going to be the old one? Is it going to be a new one? Is it going to be somewhere between the two? I've no idea. I'm going to have to see how much time I find between recording this and uploading it. So let's go. Well, I hope that was great because I still don't have any idea as to whether I did it or not. Who knows? Hopefully, if not this month, then next month. That would be great. I'll try. I do try. Who has the time for anything these days? Anyway, let's get on with the show. We have a lot to talk about, kicking off with things like CME clones Behringer, cloning Arturia. Tim Shoebridge applies polyphonic pressure to everything. Modal gets portable with the Cobalt5S. Arturia goes all fragmented. Squarp has a desktop button array. Steinberg ditches the dongle with Cubase 12. Neutral Labs bends waves with Meg. Tangible Waves has a Natty Volca mixer. Waldorf turns a desktop version of a keyboard back into a keyboard. Roland rolls out an old chorus, a cheap Phantom, and a new Space Echo. Buchla reissues new and improved 200 series modules. Noise Engineering has a bundle. Cherry Audio comes up with a Dreamsynth. Pittsburgh Modular adds more animals to its circus. Anti-Kulture disrupts precision. Tracktion Waveform Pro hits version 12. Korg releases the OPSIX and Wavestate as VST instruments. Sputnik generates variable waveforms. And feedback lets loose on the anarchy with the punk module. But first, a bit of Behringer. Now last month Behringer snuck in just into the end of last month's monthly by revealing a mini synth called the Pro VS, tiny little Profit VS in a tiny little synth, and then a JP8000 in a micro synth called the JP4000, now called the JT4000 for, I don't know, who knows? Who knows what happened there? But anyway, since then, they've released a whole bunch more. Release is not the right word. The word should be given us prototype-looking sort of photos / rendered images of, because none of this stuff actually exists in a shop that you can buy. But Behringer do absolutely insist that all of this stuff will be available one day. One day it will. So what do we have? Well, I mean, tons. I mean, they've already taken their Model D, right? Their Model D version, a Eurorack version of the Model D, down to this sort of size. They've now taken that down to a mini size. There's now a mini Model D. There's a mini Oberheim UBXA thingy. There's a mini... What else is there? There's a mini Jupiter 8, for heaven's sake, called the Saturn. And there's a flipping mini CS80. all of them in this tiny little form, in these mini synths, and they're going to be going for like 100 quid, I think, for the mini synths. For the micro ones, the even smaller ones are going to be going for 49 quid. Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, to the point of them being kind of throwaway, disposable synthesizers almost. We're talking about stylophone cost price. Fascinating. I mean, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I guess the thing is because Behringer haven't been able to get hold of any chips for like ages, and so they haven't been able to ship any product for ages. Rather than lay all their engineers off, they said, well, why don't you get to work and come up with other things, design other things around the technology that we're using, that we're modeling, that we're reinventing or whatever it is, and come up with a new version. So they came up with this mini format and the micro format, two little mini synths that will sit on your desktop that give you bugger all controls, but big, fat, healthy sound. And that's quite exciting. I mean, the idea behind Behringer is that everyone should have synths, because we, like water, air, clothing, we all deserve synthesizers. And so here you go. All you need to do is give them about $40-50, and you can have a synthesizer, and your life will be complete, or at least your life will start to then tumble over into this having to have the next synthesizer, and until eventually every surface is covered with synthesizers, because that's the reality of this game, is there's no stopping. Once you're hooked in, that's it. But anyway, by the by, there's a lot of exciting stuff potentially coming from Behringer. The annoyance everyone's having with it is simply because it's not available, and they don't know when it will be available because they have this chip problem. The world has a chip problem. It's not just Behringer. So some people are getting narked about that, what's the point of showing us all this stuff if we can't actually buy it? And there's some validity in that, but also, hey, new synths, new coming, and we like to know about things that are coming, and that can also be exciting. The other thing is there's more to it than that. There's not just the mini synths. They also showed us some other synth, like the Proton, which is like the evolution of the Neutron, a bigger, wider, bluer type synthesizer. There's also the Model 15, which was kind of, I think you're guessing, it's a clone of the grandmother or the matriarch, something along those sorts of lines. It has that kind of colour in it. It's going very much for a Moog vibe, and that's in their Eurorack-sized synthesizer. They're also releasing a two-voice being based on the Oberheim two-voice, which is two SEMs side by side, tied together and sort of put forward as a two-voice instrument. And that does look pretty phenomenal, I have to say. We've also seen the Toro, which is a take on the Moog bass synth. The Taurus, I think it is, which is a foot pedal enabled bass synth stuck at your feet that you play with your feet like you're an organist. But Behringer have kind of taken that one and cut away all of the foot control and just left it as a bit of a bass synth, which seems to miss the point, I think. I think there's a lot of other bass synths which are cool to use as a bass synth, whereas the unique selling feature of the Taurus was the fact that you played it with your feet. So removing that aspect tends to remove the point of it, really. But I guess at the same time it is used not always with your feet. Some people play it with their hands, and so therefore there it is. Who knows? Who knows? I'm sure people will lap it up as they tend to lap these things up. We also saw sneak previews of the SH5, the Roland SH5 clone they've got, which is in a keyboard form like the Poly D, which looks great. More information on the UBXA desktop version. There's potential synthesizers coming out of their eyes, coming out of their arms, coming out of every pore. I mean, they must be doing their nut with this whole chip business, because they have so much stuff almost ready to go and they are hampered on every side. So I guess they decided that this month they are just going to splurge all that stuff out there, let us know all about it, just so that we remember they're still there and that we can be distracted from being annoyed that our particular synth that we're particularly interested in isn't available yet. And we've been waiting for years and years. But of course that's not all. The other thing they showed was a couple of versions as Eurorack modules. So the Pro VS, for instance, the little sequential Pro VS Prophet VS mini synth is also going to be available as a Eurorack module, and so perhaps it's the CS1, their CS80 mini synth clone. And I imagine that this will be an ongoing form, that we'll get a big version of something, we'll get a mini or micro version of something, and then a Eurorack version of something. Which, I mean, that's a plan, it's a way to go that gives the maximum amount of value and use out of all the cloning and technology and measuring and emulating and all of the work that's gone into reverse engineering a synthesizer, put into as many useful places as possible. And I suppose that makes perfect sense. They also had a tiny update on the progress into their DAW. They're making a free DAW, a Cubase Pro Tools beating recording platform is the plan, and we first heard about that a few years ago now, and they had planned to release it within 18 months, but now it's dragging on a bit from that. But they put forward the idea that all of these synthesizers, as well as being big, small Eurorack, are also going to be software. So they were showing virtual instrument versions of things like the Prophet 5 and the Oberheim, this, that, and the other. So the DAW is expected to ship with a whole bunch of software instruments, authentic recreations of emulated something or other instruments as well. So we get everything. All the hardware, in all the sizes, in all the formats, and digital too. Extraordinary. But perhaps the most interesting product to come out of this furore, of this frenzy of Behringer was the Hero Tribe. Hero Tribe, what's that? Well, Behringer managed to snag themselves a legend in the shape of Hiroyuki Nishijima, who was the guy behind the Korg MS-20 and other things. And he's been working with them, and we haven't really seen any evidence of that since they announced that he was working with them. But now he's there going, ta-da, I've been doing this. And what it is, it's kind of an evolution of the Monotribe. So it's taken everything he loves about a little bass synth and drum synth and groove machine type thing, and they've stuffed it into that same form factor as you're finding the Saturn and the Pro VS in. And he's doing some kind of spin on the groove box in it. And this seems to be interesting and potentially innovative and exciting because it's new and it's different, and it's coming out of the mind of someone who knows synthesizers deeply and has clear ideas as to what he wants to do. And so that is potentially very interesting. What tickled me, I have to say, was the photograph of him where he looks like he's working in some kind of broom cupboard, like they've locked him in a room in a basement somewhere. It's like, I mean, this guy's a legend. Can't you at least give him a nice corner office somewhere with a bit of sunlight and a pot plant, you know, something, and some equipment on his desk, you know. But anyway, so exciting times in Behringer. As we say, impossible to say when it will actually arrive and what it will sound like in a proper situation. There are a couple of videos out there now, and of course they sound great as we expect them to. My main concern really is when you miniaturize something down to a small micro or mini size synthesizer, you lose a lot of what made that instrument an instrument. I mean, while you may have the sound there, you don't necessarily have the control system and the interaction which made those synthesizers great. Because you can do the sound in software these days. I don't think there's a huge advantage in hardware sound over software sound. The advantage, at least from my perspective of hardware, is its usability with your fingers, how you get your fingers in there, how you can touch things, patch things maybe, the control, that you learn a surface of control for it. That's what's important about hardware from my personal perspective. And when you've taken a big synthesizer with all that control and stuffed it into something with just a couple of controls, I think an enormous amount is lost in that. However, on the other side, synths, lots and lots of synths. We're going to be sounding like all sorts of synths, all in hardware, all wired up together. And how we're going to cope with that, who knows? Who knows? Meanwhile, CME, who you may know from their WIDI products, their wireless MIDI products, their little sort of sluggy thing that goes in the back of your MIDI keyboard and turns it into Bluetooth MIDI so you can communicate wirelessly. Awesome, great. And then, bazam, here's this. It's called the SWIDI. What the heck is it? Well, it's a MIDI controller keyboard that looks exactly like the Behringer Swing, which is a clone of the Arturia Keystep. So we have this strange clone of a clone. I mean, there's a large element of this which is potentially all to do with the 1st of April and being a little bit of a jolly jape. And that could yet still turn out to be the case because it is so remarkably similar to the Swing as to be ridiculous. But it's funny, right? Just because kind of it is, because Behringer make a big fuss about how they're allowed to clone things and how they're allowed to copy things, and it's all legal and it's perfectly okay, and it creates good competition, and we all love competition. It keeps prices keen and keeps everybody going. And so when someone comes along and clones a Behringer product so exactly, that just kind of makes you laugh. I mean, ultimately, it's Arturia who are losing out because once again, there's another product which takes all of their features and steals it again, as it were. Although that's not entirely true, because although it may look very, very similar, the functionality isn't actually that similar at all. And that's because if this is a real thing, the SWIDI is completely wireless. It has an internal battery, which means you can wirelessly charge it, so it's wireless from a power point of view, but also there are absolutely no sockets on the back at all. It works purely by wireless MIDI, which is their thing. It's what CME do, and so that seems totally appropriate. But of course what you lose, as well as the MIDI ports, you lose the sync in and out, you lose the CV outputs, the pitch, the gate, the modulation, and all of those things that make the Keystep. I've got a Keystep 37 here, which isn't entirely the same, but all of these bits on the back are incredibly useful. So what CME have done, have taken the controller and decided that everyone's going to go with Bluetooth MIDI from here on in, which I don't think we are. I mean, I can see its usefulness, absolutely, but I'd have to end up buying like 500 quid's worth of WIDI adapters in order to make all my stuff compatible with that. So while the SWIDI is supposedly cheaper than the Swing, it just doesn't have the feature set really. But heck, that made us smile. It made us smile. It's a funny thing, you know. We have to laugh at ourselves sometimes, and I thought that was a classic. So whether that's real or not remains to be seen. You know, WIDI is a great technology, and good luck to them with that. I just don't quite see it being as broadly used in order to justify a MIDI controller keyboard that has nothing else on it. Now this is a little work of genius. Tim Shoebridge is certainly a man that's touched with genius, I think, and in this little foray into a bit of programming which exists within the voltage modular environment, he's put together something called the PPG. Obviously not a Waldorf synthesizer or blue synthesizer of any kind. This stands for Polyphonic Pressure Generator. And the very simple idea is that it takes aftertouch from a regular channel aftertouch MIDI keyboard and converts that into polyphonic aftertouch. Now, the difference is polyphonic aftertouch means that for every note you can apply expression to that particular note, not all notes. With regular channel pressure, when you use aftertouch on a keyboard, you hold that key down and it does some modulation. It's like moving the mod wheel, but you do it through the pressure on the key. But with normal channel aftertouch, that goes out to everything that's playing, like the modulation wheel does and the pitch wheel does. So you hold it down and everything gets affected. With polyphonic aftertouch, just the note that you are pressing gets affected. And this is part of the MPE expression, MIDI polyphonic expression standard, MIDI 2.0, all of those sorts of things. And it's great, and it's available in a lot of synthesizers. However, there aren't that many controller keyboards out there that transmit polyphonic aftertouch so that you can actually take advantage of that feature. Now, Tim's been thinking about this, particularly through using the Dreadbox SynthFest, which has polyphonic aftertouch, but again doesn't have a keyboard to provide that functionality. And he worked on this little app that was going to take channel aftertouch and transmit that, or take hold of it, transmit it back out as polyphonic aftertouch per note. So I guess you're detecting what note that you're pressing down on, sending that information along with the modulation, and then filtering that so that only occurs on the right note amongst all those other notes. You know, it's ridiculously simple to the point that you think, why is that technology not just baked in to every MIDI controller? Why is it not already there? Because it seems like a no-brainer. Why not do that? Because that, you've got to think about the amount of data that's being generated in order to make that happen. And if your synth supports polyphonic aftertouch, then those messages are going to be available to be read, and all it needs is a modulation amount and a key number, surely. And that's what Tim's little plugin is providing. Genius. Absolutely genius. Anyway, it's fantastic. I mean, Voltage Modular, when I talk about that being a plugin for that, it seems to be the place where Tim is just doing a lot of programming and developing at the moment. And you can get a free version of Voltage Modular. It's like a Eurorack environment. But within that, you can run all sorts of MIDI utilities and bits and pieces. So it just runs as a plugin in your DAW. You stick his PPG in there and route your MIDI to and from it, and it will do the business. Fantastic. I haven't had a go yet. I keep meaning to. I'd really like to try that out, particularly with the SynthFest and other bits and pieces, because I think it's an absolute work of genius. As I said, can't say enough about it. Awesome. Go and try that out. Modal have decided to go a little bit portable with the Cobalt5S. It's a 5-voice version of the Cobalt 8, which was an 8-voice virtual analog synthesizer. What they've done is that they've sort of taken the big chunkiness of the Cobalt 8 and kind of squeezed it down in sort of depth wise to make it the size of a sort of a MIDI controller sort of size. They've stripped out a bunch of the knobs but left you 16 across the front, which are actually probably enough to get you into all of the things you need to do. Now, the Cobalt has 2 oscillators which can load an interesting array of virtual analog waveforms. It's almost as if Modal have put together a whole bunch of little Eurorack patches to create an interesting waveform and then stuff that inside. And then you can add those to either oscillator and blend between the two, and then apply filters and effects and all the usual sort of synthesizer stuff. The beauty of the Cobalt synthesizer, in my view, is just that it's straightforward, sounds lovely, works like a synthesizer. You know, you've got a couple of oscillators with really interesting waveforms that you can go, oh, that's really interesting, and you can move those about and modulate them. Then you've got a good sounding filter which just sounds sweet and lovely, a couple of nice effects at the end. You know, it's just good. It's just smiley. There's nothing terribly clever or complicated. It's just a good sounding, pleasing sounding virtual analog synthesizer. It's great. Massive sequencer inside, massive arpeggiator that can do interesting things. The differences between the 8 and the 5S are, I mean, physically you've got a lack of knobs. So there's a little bit more going on with the menu and having to use multiple functions for different knobs and bits and pieces. So there's a slight added level of menu annoyance, I suppose. But all the main controls are very easily accessible. And you'll be doing the majority of your stuff right on the front panel. It doesn't have a reverb. This time they've got a chorus, and it's a new chorus, and it's really sounds really nice. It's just got chorus and delay, not quite the same multi-effects engine as before. And of course it only has 5 voices. The other change is that on the left hand side, rather than the joystick, you now have got an XY pad for stuff, which also has pressure to it as well for added performance value. And so it's a great little synth. It's well priced. It's very, very usable, very finger friendly. I mean, it's a smaller keyboard, but it feels nice. It's still got channel aftertouch in there. And it's a sort of thing that could sit on your desk as a bit of a little MIDI controller as well, because it doesn't take up too much space. They do make a big fuss about it being portable, which is a little bit weird because it doesn't take batteries, but you can power it with a USB power pack. It just runs off USB, and so that's relatively simple, I think. Arturia have released this really interesting plugin called Fragments. It has shades of clouds, I suppose, in it. The idea being that it granulates whatever you stick through it. So it reshapes and reforms. It takes stuff out and repeats them, delays them, does crazy things with them, pushes them around, does all of that sort of granular things that we've come to enjoy. I think mostly. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with granular, as in it kind of just seems to be a way of breaking things. But every now and again within there, you find an absolute swathe of beautiful things. And that seems to be, in my playing with it, what Fragments does very, very well. So while there is the glitchiness and the weirdness and the craziness and the density of stuff within there, it also has these moments of space, these moments of beauty, these moments of richness and depth, which are just mesmerizing, I should say. How you use it, I've no clue, but stepping through a few presets and fiddling with the odd parameter, then that's probably enough. You don't need to really understand it. You just need to enjoy what other people have done for you, and don't ask any questions. There's a new sequencer from Squarp Instruments called Hapax. It has a vibe of the Deluge about it, has a vibe of the Poly End, well, both their sequencer and their tracker, funnily enough. It's gorgeous, stylish desktop unit, this array of 16x8 buttons on the front that light up beautifully to visualize your patterns and your sequencing and your modulation and all the other bits and pieces that go into creating a desktop doorless sequencing experience. Inside you've got 16 tracks to play with, you have 8 patterns per track. You can chain everything up, undoubtedly, and out the back it's got so many connections as you won't know what to plug them into. There's 4 lots of CV and gate out the back, which is cool, as well as 4 lots of MIDI, and I really appreciate that sort of thing, because often we assume that we can chain together our MIDI devices. You go into one and then through to another, and that's fantastic, but a lot of synthesizers don't have throughs. A lot of them don't, and so having multiple ports, I think, on a proper desktop sequencer is becoming more and more essential. Anyway, it's looking very, very cool. It has all sorts of interesting MIDI tools within it, like Euclidean randomization and algorithms for this, that, and the other, which is something which they've always had. I mean, things like their Hermod module had all of that sort of sophistication and interesting things inside it. But what I tended to find with the Hermod was it was quite difficult to unearth those facilities within the menu system. Hopefully, with the Hapax, they've brought it all more to the surface, so it's a little bit less digging around required, and perhaps, hopefully, you can get to it a lot more immediately. We already knew that Cubase 12 would be ditching the dongle, and now they finally have. It's finally here. I confess I haven't installed it, so I don't know how that works in terms of how the copy protection works. What I have done recently is installed one of the Hallian instruments, and I got so tied up in knots with it that I don't even know that it works. I couldn't really get it to work. I got really confused about how it installs and which bit is installed and which bit is authorized and how these bits work. So hopefully those sorts of things have been ironed out by now, so that it's a completely smooth and seamless experience, and we're not sitting around going, oh, I long for those dongle days when I could just plug in my dongle and the thing would just work. You know, that's always been the advantage of the dongle side of things. To go to a copy protection system where you have to register, and then is it this computer that's registered or that one, and you know, going down those sorts of roads are not necessarily better. The main better bit being losing your dongle has always been a risk, or breaking it, and then that becomes a whole other thing. So who knows? I don't know what the answer is to copy protection. I always liked Cakewalk's version, which was that we don't have any, we just kind of like assume people want to pay for it if they want to pay for it, which I think that's pretty healthy generally speaking in terms of user experience. But anyway, Cubase 12, what's all that about? Well, Cubase, of course, is the massive door of all doors. It's the industry standard to a large degree when you're talking about creativity indoors. It's going to be packed full of instruments and mixing and processing and editing tools and that interface that it's changed in recent years. It's gone to a more of a one-window approach rather than having all these multiple windows open all the time. And that's, I think, really helped tidy it up and focus it a bit more. But it still has its way of being. It's still very grey and absolutely packed full of tools and potential to be a complete and utter studio and creation station. Just having a look to see what's new in Cubase 12, and apparently unlimited creativity is new, because unfortunately in version 11 it was all very sort of limited. You know, you felt closed in by it, whereas now there are no limits. Neural Labs are always coming up with interesting and unexpected things. I've got, what's this? This is the Nermal that released a little while ago, which is a kit which I do plan to make very, very soon. Although I get the feeling I've been saying that for some time. But no, I'm definitely going to make it. That's more of a distortion thing, which is a very neutral, which is something that Neutral are very much into. Their latest one is the Meg. The Meg. So what's that? Well, it's another kit. I'm going to build it very soon. The pair of those, I think. I'm going to build them all simultaneously, one in each hand. I think it'll be quite a spectacle. But anyway, the Meg is a wave shaper, but it's quite a unique wave shaper. It's a really simple looking module, a very simple kit. But inside, Neutral Labs have designed a way of kind of shifting waveforms against each other rather than just folding them in half, which is fine, and we like that. We enjoy those sort of tones that are created. But this is more to do with shifting waveforms about. So rather than the fold, you have kind of this shifting up and down. So you have your 0 point, and then you've got your sine wave on it, and then your wave is sort of pushed up like it's offset and folded and manipulated in that way. Anyway, I don't really know what it sounds like yet because I haven't built it, but I hope to. And it looks like just an interesting way to add a little bit of flavour to your Eurorack. Now, we know Tangible Waves from their AE modular. Their strange, weird-looking mini modular, which is great value, great sounding, just housed in a very much a sort of do-it-yourself, smaller patch wire version of modular. Well, they have surprised everyone by releasing a little mixer. It's a Volca size mixer. It fits into the whole Volca size and way of doing things, and is designed to power and mix together different Volcas. But of course it could mix other things too. But it does have an array of 4 power sockets, so you can power 4 Volcas from it, or I suppose other things if needs be, if they have similarly compatible power supplies. But then you've got 6 channels and a couple of stereo channels to mix everything together. I mean, Korg do their own Volca mix thing, which has only got 3 channels, but it does have a built-in speaker, whereas this does not, because no one really wants that, to be honest. But instead you've got some metering, you've got some effects ends, and it's basically just a fun box with which to mix a bunch of Volcas. Now, Waldorf make extraordinary keyboards, and they made this extraordinary keyboard called the Quantum. Now, the Quantum has every form of synthesis known to anybody stuffed inside it somewhere, including, samples, FM, wavetable, reverted, harmonic, resonating something or others, and granular, and this stuff, and everything stuffed into it, into this enormous, beautiful looking keyboard. Tons of control and lights all over it. It's got this incredible shell going on, and you've got this touch screen in the middle which waveforms. It's like a synthesizer spaceship. Maybe that's its best description. But it's flipping expensive, right? It costs an absolute fortune. So then Waldorf went, well, it's a bit pricey. Maybe we can do something slightly cheaper. So they then built the Iridium, and the Iridium took the sound engine and a bit of the control and stuffed it into something much smaller, into a desktop unit. And everyone went, well, that's cool, fantastic. Why don't you do one of those with a keyboard on it? And they said, well, we've got the Quantum's the one with the keyboard. Yeah, I know, but it's a bit pricey. Oh, right, okay. So now they've taken the Iridium and stuck a keyboard on it and made it not a Quantum. They've made it something else. They've made it an Iridium keyboard synthesizer. So what does that mean? Oh, I don't know. I keep looking at this, scratching my head going, what? I don't quite understand. It was a keyboard already, and then you made it into a desktop, and now you've made it into a keyboard again, but for much cheaper. I think what they've done is they've taken out a bit of the more high-end esoteric stuff. So they've taken out the analog filters, for instance, and now you've got a digital filter section. They haven't reduced the voice count, they've increased the voice count. I think the analog filter nature of the Quantum restricted its polyphony to 8 voices, I think, whereas the Iridium is 16 voices, and the keyboard version follows that. So they've lost some things, the hugeness of the keyboard. It doesn't have the same action or polyphonic aftertouch, I don't think. So a simpler synthy style keyboard onto the Iridium to make like there's a whole new synthesizer, but it's not really. It's a cut down version of the Quantum and a Iridium with a keyboard thing on it. Confused? No, there's no reason to be. It's just it is what it is. Roland are trucking on with their 50th anniversary celebrations with a little spattering of releases. The first one is the Juno 60 Chorus. Now they're only a few years behind everybody else. I mean, everybody else has released a Juno 60 clone of some kind, or emulation of that lovely chorus that everybody liked from the Juno synthesizers. But now Roland have released a software version of it, so you can have a plugin of that along with your Roland Cloud account and have be assured of the authenticity of that wobbly, chorusy sound. The other thing they've done is release a new Phantom. It's not really a new Phantom. It's a bit like the other Waldorf one in that you've got the Phantom, which is a huge, fat, great big workstation which has everything in it you could possibly imagine wrapped up in an enormous keyboardy fashion. But they've decided that that's perhaps a little bit too expensive, and so they've cut it down in no way that I can think. I mean, the sound engine is pretty much the same, I believe, but the case and the keybed is much lighter, so they've shaved off a whole ton of the weight to make it a lot more portable and versatile, while kind of retaining all of the functionality as far as I can tell. So you get the whole Phantom experience pretty much in a smaller, slightly smaller, much lighter, cheaper experience, which is very cool. Good idea, I think. And the other thing they've just released, which is more of a guitar pedal, which I don't usually cover guitar pedals very often, but this is a new version. A new version. This is Roland, right, doing a new version of an old classic thing. It's not a software version, it's a hardware version, new version, and we're getting this across, of the Space Echo. Now the Space Echo, everyone loves the Space Echo. Great big box thing with a wonderful dial on the front, VU meter, a bit green. You put stuff into it and you get stuff back. You know, and then some, because it's a delay, it's a tape echo. And it's beloved, and we all have virtual tape echoes. Some people have hardware ones, if you can find one and keep it maintained. But we all have software ones now in our DAWs, and we enjoy those a great deal for all of the weird warbly warmth that they can add to your sound. Well, Roland have released the RE202. It's a new old thing. Roland have done a new old thing. I can't quite believe it. I can't believe it. It's very exciting. Now, it looks great. It absolutely reflects the original box thing, but this is in a 3-button pedal. And of course, it's not quite real. Of course it's not. But, you know, let's hang on to the idea that Roland have released a new old thing, right? And let's just ignore slightly that it's going to be an emulation. It's going to be digital. It's going to be a recreation of something as opposed to actually having tape running around inside it. And so basically they say that they've captured, of course, every nuance of the original RE201 Space Echo. Of course they have, and they've stuck it into a hardware thing so we can all enjoy it. And that's great. I mean, you know, it's not an actual tape echo, but it will probably be affordable, it will work, it will look great, sound good, you know. So that's really all we want. And it has the knobs and the controls and the bits and pieces that are going to make it an instrument, going to make it something which you can play and perform with in a real sense, in a real hardware situation. So great job. They've also done a smaller Boss style pedal. I think they're calling the RE2, which just simplifies things and just gives you a tape delay, I suppose, in a smaller pedal form. But it's an awesome thing that Roland have done, I think, despite the fact that it's digital. I mean, the thing has crazy stuff like a USB port and memory locations. I mean, can you imagine? Anyway, so exciting times, and we're still looking forward to more stuff from Roland over the course of this year, because it is their 50th anniversary, and actually next month, April, is when their actual birthday is. So we're looking forward to something, hopefully, spectacular in next month's video. Buchla is continuing to do awesome things. After a long time of doing very, very slow things very, very slowly, they are now on a bit of a roll. After seeing the tip-top audio collaboration with Buchla to produce the 200 series modules in Eurorack form, which was awesome and extraordinarily good value for money, they've now swung completely the other way to redo the entire series in the original format in 4U, but with a certain degree of modern technology and reinvention and reimagining, and released it as these incredibly premium but undoubtedly extraordinary modules that no one really understands. Well, there's a section of the synthesizer world who understands these sorts of things, and well done, you know, that's great, but I don't think I'll ever wrap my head around what any of this is all about. But it looks spectacular, it sounds extraordinary. The whole thing's been managed or put together by Rowan Philippoff of Black Corporation, and previously of Sputnik Modular, and so he has the chops, really, to put this whole thing together as authentically as you could possibly imagine. I mean, these are kind of being hand-built by angels in some awesome paradise factory somewhere, you know, slowly crafted out of the bare rock of awesomeness to produce each one of these extraordinary, complicated and out there modules. I mean, it is an exciting time that we have access to these sorts of things, and I think it's great. I mean, I really loved the whole tip-top thing because it actually brought the Buchla concepts a little bit closer to everybody, so you could start working them into your Eurorack system. Because, I mean, the Buchla West Coast way of doing things is just slightly different. It's a different language, it's a different concept and a different emphasis on what goes on when you're putting together modules and when you're mixing algorithms, waveforms, signals, control voltages, and those things together. I mean, ultimately, it's music and science coming together in an artistic explosion of silver and blue and reds, and just fascinating stuff. And it's so great to see them unafraid to restart and to re-look at their history and produce something, because people are going to be undoubtedly interested in how that works and how that goes together. And people who used to have or have old Buchla modular are having an opportunity to refresh that or to come back to it. And all of those vibes are immensely positive, I think. Noise Engineering are continuing their assault on our doors with some more VST plugins. Yes, this time they've taken a bunch of their modules and stuffed them into these outrageously awesome VST instruments. We have, are you ready for my terrible pronunciations? We have the Cursor Verona, no, the Cursus Viri, for heaven's sake, the Cursus Virior. We have Desmodus, that's a good one, I like that one. And we have the Basimilus Iteratas. So these are crazy modules which are now available as plugins for your DAW, and that are packed full of crazy sounds, of noise, of weaponized analog digital hybrid craziness, I would say, that can bring an extraordinary element of crafty, strange Eurorack modular type loveliness to your DAW. Cherry Audio have produced the Dreamsynth. Is it your Dreamsynth? Is it our Dreamsynth? Is it the Dreamsynth that we've always dreamt of? Or is it perhaps more of a play on the idea of those sort of dreamy pads that you got out of a particular type of 1980s hybrid digital analog flip-flop falling over between two worlds kind of synthesizer? I think it could be the latter. I think the idea is that this takes on synthesizers like the Sequential Prophet VS, like the Ensoniq, like the Kawais, the stuff that was doing interesting things by bringing together analog ideas and digital ideas at a time before we really got fully into what digital was all about. And so you're marrying together these digital oscillators which could produce all sorts of different waveforms, and then stuffing that into an analog architecture where you can analogically filter things and add that warmth and that distortion and those saturations that you wouldn't get in later digital synthesizers. So the idea, I think, behind the Dreamsynth is just to tap in to the convenience and versatility of the digital synthesizer world, along with that warmth and crustiness that we love and the familiarity with analog synthesis. So there's nothing particularly strange or innovative, I think, about the Dreamsynth. It's just that it angles itself at a sweet spot of where digital and analog meet, and it gives you an interface which is very analog familiar while providing a huge raft of digitally inspired sounds and synthesis. It's great stuff. I mean, the Cherry Audio synthesizers are awesome. I do really like them, and this one is great value, as they've all been, at around $30-40, and is going to provide you with a nice and, at the moment, slightly different sound set to a lot of stuff that we're hearing at the minute. Pittsburgh Modular are continuing their experiments into producing, well, I mean, I think the idea was, right, a while ago, they said that we're trying to produce some kind of big synthesizer thing. And so on our way to producing this big, interesting Lifeforms-esque type synthesizer, we're going to produce these limited runs of limited edition modules, which are kind of parts of it that we're trying out. We're experimenting with this part and with that part, and we're going to make a little module about it and stick it out there. And that was what they said early on, although this seems increasingly unlikely, I think, because the modules themselves are becoming fascinating, interesting, diverse, versatile, and in some ways I hope they become a bit more permanent, because I'm worried that all these are just going to disappear after they've done their single run on them. Anyway, the latest thing they have is the Polar Bear and the Llama. Of course, thoroughly related. One of them's a kick drum, one of them's a snare. I think the bear is the snare, if I remember rightly, and the Llama is the drama. The Llama is the drama and the kick. The bear is the snare, in the bear and the snare, the noise. So of course, this is Pittsburgh Modular, so they've done something different and innovative. They come up with a brand new way to synthesize kick drums that no one's ever thought of before, and you get this interesting kick bass drum module. Fantastic. Like it. It's going dump dump dump. Yeah, we understand that. Great. Couple of little knobs in it. Looks fantastic. Quirky, interesting. Yeah, Great stuff. And then the Polar Bear snare is a bit more of a modelling type of thing. It seems to be you're modelling about skins. You've got the top skin and bottom skin. You can play them both at the same time, so you can actually have almost, I think you get 2 notes of polyphony out of that particular module. So you can hit the top and the bottom, and you can change how snazzy and snary it is. What's the word? The sizzle, the schnizzle, how schnizzly the Polar Bear may be. So yeah, cool. And the interesting was that Richard, as was demonstrating these new modules, it was demonstrating it in a rack of gear which had loads of other modules that we hadn't seen. There were crows and monkeys and elephants and bananas and squirrels, all sorts of stuff in there. So it looks like there's a lot more to come. I mean, there are some oscillators in there, complex oscillators, filters, I think, dynamics, all sorts of stuff. So a lot more stuff to come from Pittsburgh Modular, which is great. All of it is looking great. I just wish it was a bit more permanent, so they could be more generally available and not having to panic buy because they're only going to do 100 of the things. But we'll see what develops. They're not really sure exactly where they're taking all this yet, but it's great. It's a great journey. The Anti-Kulture Precision Generator. This is an interesting one. It has shades of the Eloquencer about it, I think. It also has, I mean, its focus is randomization. Its focus is the creation and generation of patterns through controlled random chaos-y type stuff. So you've kind of got to think of it along the lines of a multifaceted Turing machine, or something like the stochastic inspiration generator. So the idea is that you give birth to sequences. You set some parameters and go, and off it goes, and it generates, and then you can use that on multiple levels, and then you can adjust it and tweak each step. And they've gone for a size of module, a ridiculous size of module for Eurorack, which gives you access to everything. That's your trade-off. You want to have access to every step within the pattern. You can, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you in HP. This is enormous, this thing. But that's what you have to do if you want that kind of level of control. The interface is really, really simple. You've got sliders down one side where you introduce the level of randomization to things that you want, like the stochastic inspiration generator. And you've got a keyboard on one side where you can enter notes or play notes in. And then you've got the grid array, which turns notes on and off. And obviously you can play with gates, you can play with notes, you can play however you want that to work. The craziest thing is, I think, is because of the size and expansion of all this, it only appears to have one CV and gate output. So you're only really running one thing, one monophonic line on this 40 HP sequencer, which seems quite extraordinary. But we're not really seeing it fully fledged and properly working yet. So at the moment, it looks like something that's very, very fascinating. I would love to have a go. I like all that kind of generative, internal, random setting things that get beyond me having to go step, note, step, note, step, note. So while I appreciate the writing of a melody or a bass line is an important skill to have and to be able to do that as a musician, I also like the idea of just setting a few ideas and letting the machine work the rest of the nonsense out. Do you know what I mean? I've always liked Tracktion. They're really upfront about things. It's like you go to their web page to find out about Waveform Pro 12, which is their new release, and it says, no excuses. Go and create. Here you go, mate. Here's the whole lot. Here's the whole lot for you. You got nothing to worry about. No excuses. You must now make music. You can't now say that we don't have nothing, right? Because it's all in here. Use it, right? It's all in here. Nothing's missing anymore. Because, Waveform did suffer sometimes from missing stuff. Like at one point, it didn't have a mixer. Little things. Little things like that. But now they're saying with version 12, that's it. It's all in there. It's a huge thing. Huge update. So what's new about it? Oh, I don't know. I've always liked Waveform, and before it, Tracktion, I suppose, as it was called, in that it's got a lot of interesting and innovative things in it that other people don't necessarily do. The whole signal routing is interesting. You've got a whole modular environment in there so you can wire things together differently. You had this wonderful bin of LFOs where you just drag an LFO onto whatever you want and it modulates it, which is so simply genius that I don't understand why it's not in everything, in every other piece of software. I don't get it. There's a lot of interesting things where you can focus in on a specific clip and do a whole load of stuff within that space rather than go into an editor. I think you can also do, can you? Can't remember. But anyway, it has a whole load of processes that you can run within just looking at a part of your track. And that includes patterns and steps and generative stuff and all sorts of bits and pieces. I think in fleshing out Pro 12, they've brought in a lot more plugins and effects and rounded it out to be a bit more of a fully fledged DAW rather than a quirky, interesting, creative place. They've now, pushed itself into a more general place so that they go into waveform. They're not losing out and they're not missing some of those tools that they would normally use in another DAW. But the whole thing looks great. It's had a nice new paint job, a bit of an overhaul, better browser. That's one of their big things with the browser, and they've now made that even super. They've introduced MIDI randomization and probability, lots more tools, better effects, guitar effects, better software instruments. The whole 9 yards they've gone for in this version. And so if you're in the market for an alternative DAW, you're not happy in your Cubase and your Pro Tools and your Studio One or whatever, then I would fully recommend going and checking out Waveform, because it has everything now that you would normally expect, and it has so many interesting and different ways of doing things that it could really inspire your creativity within the DAW itself. Rather than it just being a recording or host program, it could actually be the place where you start to write. Korg surprised everybody by releasing their OPSIX and Wavestate keyboard as plugins. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. I mean, a bit mind-blowing, really. I mean, these two synthesizers were in a very similar form factor, and in fact inside, I believe it might be running on a Raspberry Pi or some kind of ARM architecture within side. So it is essentially a software instrument within a hardware form, but created as an interactive, versatile instrument that's supposed to work within that hardware environment. So taking that out, sticking it in the software is quite an odd experience. And I've had a kind of a brief look through them. What I would say is that they're quite baffling. I mean, Wavestate in particular has always been baffling. This whole wave sequencing business of wave after wave after wave was complex in the hardware, but at least with the hardware you have a workflow that you can learn your way through it. In the software, in some ways, it opens up the whole thing to a whole load more complexity, because you don't have dedicated knobs to everything. Everything is now on screen, you're trying to run it with a mouse. So it's a very different experience. I mean, I think what's awesome about it is that you get all of that curated content, you get all of those presets and those sounds running directly within your DAW, and it sounds phenomenal, and the animation and the movement from waveform to waveform is fantastic. I don't know anything else quite like it. And so from that respect, you're getting an awful lot of synthesis power within a plugin. It's just at the loss of the curated interface to that. So, pros and cons. And I'm sure, once you get fiddling around with your mouse and understand what's going on, then it'll be easier and easier, and it will reveal itself to you. I'd like to think so. OPSIX is similar because it's FM and it's slightly complex, but the interface on the OPSIX at least is quite a joyful thing to behold, with every single waveform pinging and pouncing about, and so it invites you in far more to edit and to tweak and to start to understand what's going on than perhaps the Wavestate does. Wavestate is just like, what is going on? There's lots of things going on. Whereas the OPSIX is a bit smoother experience. Well, at least that's what I found. But, go and check them out. And I imagine there'll be a mod wave along at some point. So a big wavetable moving and modulating synthesizer. That could be interesting. I didn't really know that Sputnik Modular was still going. I kind of thought that had all fallen away by the wayside as Roland had moved on to the whole Black Corporation thing. But no, we've got a new module. And this is a variable waveform generator. It's a very cool module. It pulls you in towards those sliders, thinking, what are they going to do then? Oh, it's interesting. You have different waveform outputs, 4 waveform outputs, and for each one of those you have a modulator, a something which is going to do stuff to that particular waveform. So on the sine wave, you've got a wave folder, and you can push that slider up to dial in more and more wave folding. On the triangle, you've got a bit of overdrive. I think on the square wave, you've got pulse width modulation, of course. And on the other one, you've got something else that I can't remember. But So essentially what you get is this oscillator, which is generating all these waveforms, which can be modulated differently and folded and changed and tonally sculpted via either physical movements on those sliders or via CV coming in, giving you an incredibly animated sound coming out of this oscillator. It'll be doing all sorts of things. It's like you've got the oscillator section just over on the left with your tuning and your FM and your other normal bits, and then you've got this massive section which is just going to change and push the heck out of these waveforms into all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Fantastic. What a great fun module to have a play with. And of course, being a Sputnik modular thing, the quality is off the charts. So fascinating. Variable waveform generator could be a good fun thing for some serious tones within your modular. And this is a suitably anarchic one. This is Punk from Feedback Modules. And the idea is that Feedback thought, well, we want to make some distortion. We like these distortions. Which distortion should we put this one in? Oh, I don't know. This one? Don't know. So they kind of stuck it all into one module. You get two channels. On one channel, you get this quite interesting, I think, sort of Porter Studio inspired saturation and distortion. It's sort of taking the idea of tape distortion from cassette based stuff and little amplifiers, and is creating a warmth and a wobble and a gooiness from that kind of vibe. On the other side, it's got a bunch of FETs in different ways, which is sort of guitar diode / other thing type distortions. Plug a guitar in, distortion, that kind of thing. I'm not explaining it very well, but then I don't have to because it's called Punk and they don't really care. So you got like two lots of distortions smashed together with a switch that switches it between diodes and other things. You put sound in, crap comes out the other side in the most, deliciously chunky sort of way. It looks great. I love the big glowing anarchy sign stamped on the front. Got to be a good in that one. And finally, are we there yet? Whew, nearly. Finally, this month, just the news that SynthFest is back. SynthFest is officially going to be on in October, back up at the Octagon at Sheffield, like it always has been. And it will have everything. Everyone will be there because we'll be so in need of a good UK-based synth show by this time that hopefully absolutely everyone will be there. It's always a great time. It's a place that I went to a few years ago where I first discovered Eurorack, which was awesome. I uncovered Eurorack and then shared it with the world. And if it wasn't for that show, no one would have heard about Eurorack ever. So that's quite exciting. So that sort of thing can happen. Just so you can find all sorts of things at that sort of place. So it's just a day event, one day at a weekend, where you can go and sample all of the latest synthesizers and stuff, hopefully. But as soon as we have more information on it, I will let you know. So there you go. What's coming up? Who knows? Well, I do have the continuing story of the Erica Synths educational DIY stuff. I've done now the VCO, the VCA, the dual VCA. I've now last week did the case and power supply, which was... that was a fascinating struggle, that one was. I had some little bits of difficulty in the lack of documentation. But, that's why I'm here. That's why I do these things. But coming along is the envelope generator. I'm going to do this next week. I was hoping to do it this week, but I'm kind of doing this. So I'm running out of time on that. But look out for the link that I'll do to the YouTube live stream that I'll put up a couple of days beforehand. And then together we will sit down and build and learn about envelope generators. So that's exciting. Other things coming along, well, I've got modules, I've got synths, I've got ideas on crazy things to do, fascinating things to do, lots of things. Lots and lots of things. So if you like the sort of stuff that I do and you'd like to encourage me to do some more, then please do come and visit me on Patreon and maybe consider throwing me a couple of quid so that I can keep on rolling around in it. But otherwise, subscribe, press those buttons, like it, share it with your friends, get together in a pub and talk about this monthly. Talking of which, then I'm going to do that this weekend, Sunday night. I think. I haven't really checked. But as usual, we'll get together for a live stream just to chat about the technology and what's going on. Might poke at some modules, make some music or something. Who knows? But that'll be the plan for this Sunday night, 8 o'clock British summertime, as we're now ridiculously in. And that would be cool to come along and join in with that. Otherwise, that'll do for now. I hope you enjoyed the new ident, if I did it, I don't know. And will there be one at the end? I don't know. It's exciting at this time. No one knows what's happening. It's live telly and we're just going for it. So in the meantime, go make some tunes.